Manitoba is larger than France. It covers 649,000 square kilometers of boreal forest, tundra, prairie, and frozen coastline. Fewer than 1.5 million people live here. More than half of them crammed into Winnipeg, huddled along the Red River like survivors around the last campfire. The rest of this enormous province stretches north into some of the emptiest, coldest land in the Western Hemisphere. 3-bedroom houses sit on the market for $8,000, $11,000, $15,000. Nobody calls, nobody visits, nobody makes an offer. Would you move somewhere the winter lasts 7 months and the nearest hospital is a 4-hour drive? Hit subscribe. I promise this is worth your time. To understand why Manitoba emptied out, you have to understand what filled it in the first place. Because this province was never an easy place to live. It was a place people came to for money, for furs, for grain, for minerals, for hydroelectric power. And when the money dried up, or the industry mechanized, or the global markets shifted, the people left. What remained were the buildings, the roads, the grain elevators, and the silence. The fur trade built the skeleton of this province centuries before Confederation. The Hudson's Bay Company established York Factory on Hudson Bay in 1684, and for nearly 200 years, Manitoba's rivers were the highways of an economy stretching from the subarctic to London. Indigenous nations, the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Dene, the Dakota, had lived on this land for thousands of years, and their knowledge of waterways and seasonal cycles made the entire trade possible. But the fur trade was extractive by design. It took from the land and sent profits east. When demand for beaver pelts collapsed in the mid-1800s, the trading posts emptied, and the economy had to reinvent itself. What followed was agriculture. Between 1870 and 1914, immigrants poured in from Ukraine, Iceland, Germany, Poland, Scandinavia, and Mennonite communities from Russia. They came for cheap land, quarter sections available for a $10 homestead fee, and turned the southern prairies into wheat fields, stretching to every horizon. Small towns sprouted along the railway lines at intervals of 10 kilometers, the distance a farmer could haul a wagon load of grain in a day. Each had a grain elevator, a general store, a church, a school. The railway was the spine, the grain elevators the vertebrae. By the early 20th century, hundreds of these communities, Minitonas, Bertle, Roblin, Grandview, Melita, Rossburn, Bozeman, Benito, filled the map. Each held a few hundred souls, but together they formed the agricultural economy that made Manitoba viable. The wheat went east to Thunder Bay, west to Vancouver, north to Churchill. For a brief, prosperous moment, ordinary people could build a life from this land. But agriculture mechanizes. In 1941, a farmer with horses could manage 160 acres. By 1970, a single operator with a modern combine could handle 1,000. By the 2000s, GPS-guided equipment allowed one family to farm 10,000 acres with almost no hired labor. Each time the machinery got bigger, the number of farmers got smaller. Each departing family meant one fewer customer at the hardware store, one fewer student at the school, one fewer voice in the church. The consolidation was relentless and perfectly legal. Nobody planned it. It happened decade after decade, until towns built to serve 500 farm families found themselves serving 50, and the grocery store closed, the school closed, the doctor left, and the young people followed the doctor to Winnipeg. Mining added another layer. Northern Manitoba sits on the Canadian Shield, rich in nickel, copper, zinc, and gold. In the 50s and 60s, massive ore deposits drew thousands to places that had never seen permanent settlement. Entire towns, Thompson, Gillam, Lynn Lake, Snow Lake, Leaf Rapids, were built from nothing, purpose-designed communities with schools, arenas, hospitals, connected to the south by rail or narrow highways through hundreds of kilometers of boreal forest. The assumption was that the ore would last. It did not. Hydroelectric power brought a third wave. Manitoba Hydro began building massive dams on the Nelson and Churchill rivers in the 1960s, and construction crews temporarily swelled places like Gillam to several thousand. Once the turbines were spinning, the maintenance crews were small. The workers moved on or went south, and the boom towns settled into quiet dependence on a handful of hydro employees and whatever service economy could survive in communities accessible only by rail or a single highway that closes in winter storms. And then there was Churchill, Canada's only Arctic deepwater port, built at the end of a railway line that took a decade to lay across muskeg and permafrost. The first grain shipment left in 1931. For decades, the port and military installations sustained several thousand people. But the naval base closed in 1968, the radar installation in the 70s, the rocket range in 85. 4,000 forces personnel left. The population dropped from over 5,000 to under 1,000. When Ottawa dismantled the wheat board in 2012, grain moved through Thunder Bay and Vancouver instead. Then in 2017, flooding washed out the rail line in 22 places, and the private American owner refused repairs. Churchill, a town with no road access, was cut off by rail for 18 months. Groceries flew in, prices doubled, people left. The pattern across all these industries is identical. People came when there was money. Infrastructure was built to extract the resource. When the resource ran out, the people left, and the infrastructure remained, decaying in a climate that punishes everything built by human hands. Manitoba winters plunge below -35. And in the north, -45 is unremarkable. Buildings that lose heating deteriorate within seasons. Roofs sag under snow. Pipes burst, and basements freeze solid. The land reclaims what was built upon it, with a patience that makes human ambition look like a brief interruption. What remains in the wake of all this leaving is a province of dramatic contrasts. Winnipeg, with over 800,000 people, is a functioning mid-sized Canadian city, with universities, hospitals, restaurants, concert halls, and professional sports teams. Brandon, the second largest city, has just over 50,000. After that, the numbers fall off a cliff. Thompson, the largest city in the north, has 13,000. Everything else is measured in thousands, hundreds, or dozens. The geography of emptiness is not random. It follows the contours of failed industries, exhausted mines, and abandoned railway spurs, and each empty region has its own story. Number 1. The Western Parkland Belt. Drive west from Dauphin on Highway 5, and the landscape begins to thin. The Riding Mountain escarpment rises to the south, but up here in the Parkland region, the municipalities that include Grandview, Roblin, and the villages scattered around them, the terrain is a mix of rolling aspen parkland and open farmland that stretches under a sky so wide it makes you feel like you are standing on the edge of something. This was prime mixed farming country a century ago. Ukrainian and Polish settlers broke the land here and built communities centered around Byzantine domed churches and cooperative grain elevators. Grandview once had a population of nearly 1,200 in the 1960s. The 2021 census recorded around 740 residents in the entire municipality. Roblin, farther northwest toward the Saskatchewan border, has followed a similar trajectory, a town that once supported a hospital, a movie theater, multiple grocery stores, and a thriving main street, gradually losing each of those amenities one by one as the farming families consolidated and the young people moved to Winnipeg or further west to Alberta. Houses here list for $35,000, $25,000, sometimes less. A 3-bedroom home on a quiet street in Roblin might sit on the market for 2 years before someone buys it at a price that would not cover a parking spot in Toronto or Vancouver. The Parkland communities are not ghost towns. They still have people, still have some services, still hold summer fairs and curling bonspiels, but they are shrinking steadily, and the trajectory has been clear for decades. The schools have consolidated. Children bust longer distances to centralized facilities. The hospitals have been downgraded to health clinics. The grain elevators, once the tallest structures in every prairie town, have been demolished by the dozen as the railways closed branch lines and consolidated grain handling into massive inland terminals. Driving through these towns at dusk, you see the outlines of where the elevator stood: a bare concrete pad, a patch of gravel, sometimes a faded sign. The wind blows through the main street, and it carries no voices. Number 2. The southwest corner, Melita and the Souris River Valley. If you drive straight south from Brandon toward the American border, the land flattens into a tabletop of cropland, broken only by the gentle valley of the Souris River. Melita sits near the bottom of this landscape, roughly 30 kilometers from the North Dakota line. It was founded in 1884 as a stopping point on the rail line, and for most of its existence, it served the surrounding farm community with the expected collection of services: a bank, a hardware store, a hospital, a school, a hockey rink. The population peaked at around 1,200 in the mid-20th century. By 2021, the municipality recorded just under 1,000 residents, and the town itself held fewer. But the numbers tell only part of the story. Walk the residential streets and count the houses with plywood over the windows. Count the lots where the house has been torn down and the grass is growing over the foundation. A two-bedroom house in Melita can be purchased for $11,000. Occasionally, listings appear below that. The challenge of this region is not just economic decline, but proximity to the American border, which offers no advantage. The nearest American towns are equally depressed. Rural North Dakota suffers the same depopulation as rural Manitoba, for the same reasons. There is no cross-border commerce to sustain anything. The Souris River occasionally floods, adding periodic property damage to the list of reasons not to stay. And the winters here, while marginally less severe than the north, are still punishing. Average January temperatures of -18 Celsius, with wind chills that push the felt temperature below -35 regularly. Heating a house through a Manitoba winter costs thousands of dollars per year in propane or natural gas, and for a house worth $11,000, the annual heating bill can exceed the property's entire market value. Number 3. The Interlake region. Between Lake Winnipeg and Lake Manitoba lies a low-lying strip of land known as the Interlake, a region that sounds like it should be cottage country, but is, for the most part, sparsely populated agricultural flatland, interrupted by marshes, remnant boreal forest, and small communities that have been losing population steadily. The Interlake runs roughly from Gimli in the south to the narrow channel between the two lakes in the north. Its eastern edge faces Lake Winnipeg, the 11th largest freshwater lake on Earth, and its western side touches Lake Manitoba. Between the two is a landscape of limestone bedrock barely covered by thin soil, prone to flooding, and difficult to farm at scale. The fishing industry on Lake Winnipeg once supported dozens of interlake communities. Icelandic settlers arrived in the late 1800s, and the fishery became their livelihood. But overfishing, invasive species, and changing regulations diminished it. The collapse of the goldeye fishery was a blow from which some communities never recovered. Agriculture here is limited by rocky, flood-prone terrain, lacking the deep black soil of the Red River Valley. Communities like Eriksdale, Lundar, Ashern, and Moosehorn have been losing population for decades. The young leave for Winnipeg, 90 minutes south on Highway 6, and the elderly remain, maintaining routines that increasingly resemble rituals performed for an audience that has already left. The Interlake is also home to several First Nations, including Peguis, one of the largest in Manitoba. These communities face compounding crises: chronic housing shortages, overcrowding, limited health care, and boil water advisories lasting years. Two different kinds of abandonment overlap here: the voluntary departure of farm families seeking opportunities elsewhere, and the involuntary neglect of Indigenous communities by governments that have failed to provide basic services every other Canadian takes for granted. Number 4. The Northern Mining Corridor, Lynn Lake and Leaf Rapids. This is where the emptiness becomes something you can feel in your chest. Provincial Road 391 runs northwest from Thompson into the deep boreal forest, a narrow two-lane highway that passes through hundreds of kilometers of spruce, muskeg, and silence before arriving at two of the most dramatic examples of resource town collapse in Canada. Lynn Lake was founded in 1950, when Sherritt Gordon Mines discovered one of the world's largest nickel deposits in the area. The entire town of Sheridan, 250 kilometers to the south, was physically relocated. 219 buildings, including houses, a school, a bank, stores, and churches, moved by tractor train over 4 winters. At its peak, Lynn Lake had a population of over 3,500. The mines provided steady employment, the company built modern housing, and the town had a movie theater, a hotel, a legion, multiple bars, and the kind of rowdy frontier energy that comes with good wages and nowhere to spend them. The last mine closed in the early 2000s. The population dropped to 675. There are currently more than 230 abandoned lots in the town and roughly 50 vacant houses. The town has been burning and demolishing abandoned homes for years. Over 70 have been destroyed in the past decade because they attract vandals, rodents, and pose fire hazards. The houses that remain standing but vacant are not fit for habitation. And Lynn Lake is 1,071 kilometers from Winnipeg. That distance is not a metaphor. It is a 10-hour drive on a road that closes in blizzards. Subscribe to show that these videos actually matter and make a difference. Leaf Rapids makes Lynn Lake look stable. This was supposed to be different. When Sherrod Gordon decided to open a copper and zinc mine at Rutten Lake in 1970, the Manitoba government created a crown corporation to build the town according to progressive planning principles. Leaf Rapids was designed as a model community, a showcase for how resource towns could be built with respect for the environment, with modern amenities, with architectural ambition. The entire central complex was placed under one roof: stores, offices, an arena, a curling rink, a hospital, a school, a library, an art gallery, a hotel, all connected, so residents could move between them in winter without stepping outside into -40 air. Architects from across Canada and Japan visited to study the design. At its peak in 1981, Leaf Rapids had 2,356 residents. The Rutten mine closed in 2002 when commodity prices collapsed. By 2006, the population had cratered to 539. By the 2021 census, 351 people remained. Since then, the decline has accelerated. As of 2026, reports indicate that only 200 to 250 residents remain. The town has been under a boil water advisory since 2013, more than a decade without safe drinking water from the tap. The council was dissolved in 2019 because it could not maintain a quorum, and the province appointed an outside administrator. The RCMP no longer stations officers full-time in the community, instead operating on a drive-in basis from elsewhere. The art gallery is closed. The restaurant is closed. The hotel is closed. The hockey arena is closed. The curling rink is closed. In 2025, the worst wildfire season in Manitoba's history, burned over 1.5 million hectares and forced the entire community to evacuate. Some residents never returned. The grocery store, the only one in town, owes more than $1.5 million to its parent company and has been operating with nearly empty shelves. As of mid-2026, reports indicate the store faces imminent closure. If it closes, the nearest grocery store is in Lynn Lake or Thompson, hours away by car. What happened to Leaf Rapids is not just economic decline, it is the total disintegration of a community that was designed to be permanent. The model town became a cautionary tale. The houses that once housed mining families are boarded up, vandalized, burned by arson, or condemned by health inspectors. The roofs cave in from years of neglected maintenance. Mold covers the interior walls. The province has sent letters to remaining residents offering help relocating to other communities. It is, in effect, a managed abandonment. Number 5. The Churchill River Corridor. Churchill itself, population roughly 900, survived its near-death experience through sheer stubbornness and polar bears. After the military left, after the port declined, after the rail line washed out, the town reinvented itself around tourism. Polar bear season in October and November generates an estimated $7 million in economic activity. Beluga whales attract summer visitors. The Northern Lights draw photographers from around the world. In 2018, Arctic Gateway Group, a partnership of 41 First Nations and Northern communities, took ownership of the port and rail line, and rail service was restored. Shipping has more than tripled since 2021. Churchill is, against all odds, a modest success story. But it remains a town with no road access, accessible only by rail or plane. The train from Winnipeg takes 44 hours. A flight takes 2.5 hours and costs several $100s one way. Everything, every can of soup, every bag of flour, every piece of lumber, arrives by rail, ship, or aircraft. Groceries cost significantly more than in southern Manitoba. The permafrost beneath the town is melting, destabilizing buildings and infrastructure. The western Hudson Bay polar bear population has declined from an estimated 1,200 to roughly 620 in the past 3 decades. If the bears disappear, the tourists disappear, and Churchill's reinvented economy disappears with them. The town is betting its future on an animal whose future is uncertain, in an environment that is changing faster than anyone predicted. Number 6. The Boreal Shield east of Lake Winnipeg. East of Lake Winnipeg, the land transforms into Canadian Shield. Ancient rock, thin soil, boreal forest, and interconnected lakes stretching to Ontario and beyond. The communities here are predominantly First Nations: Bloodvein, Barons River, Little Grand Rapids, Powingassi, accessible much of the year only by plain or winter ice roads. These are not communities experiencing conventional decline. People have lived here for thousands of years. But the conditions would stagger most Canadians. Groceries in fly-in communities cost double or triple Winnipeg prices. A bag of oranges might run $12. Housing is chronically insufficient, multiple families sharing units built decades ago. Shamattawa First Nation has been under a boil water advisory since 2018, affecting 160 homes. The community has launched a class action lawsuit against Ottawa, alleging decades of underfunding. As of 2026, 38 long-term drinking water advisories remain across 36 First Nations in Canada, and Manitoba accounts for several. The paradox is staggering. A province with more fresh water than almost any jurisdiction on Earth, where people cannot safely drink what flows from the tap. Number 7. The Gillam Hydro Corridor. Gillam exists because of electricity. Situated on the Nelson River, roughly 1,000 kilometers north of Winnipeg and 270 kilometers south of Churchill, this town is surrounded by 4 of Manitoba Hydro's largest generating stations: Kettle, Long Spruce, Limestone, and the recently completed Kiosk. The dams on the Nelson River produce a significant share of Manitoba's electrical power, much of which is exported to the United States. Gillam's population has fluctuated with the construction cycles of each dam. During peak construction periods, the population swelled to several thousand. The 2021 census recorded 1,007 residents. The town is isolated. Provincial Road 280 runs south to Thompson, but it is a narrow highway through boreal forest that closes during severe weather. The Hudson Bay Railway connects Gillam to Thompson and Churchill, but passenger service is limited. There are no shopping centers, no chain restaurants, no movie theaters. Winter temperatures regularly drop below -35. The town has a school, a nursing station, a small number of retail outlets, and the pervasive presence of Manitoba Hydro, which employs most of the working-age residents either directly or through contractors. Gillam is functional, but it is functional in the way that an outpost is functional. It serves a purpose, and the people who live there serve that purpose. And when the purpose is fulfilled, the question of what comes next hangs unanswered in the frozen air. The Kiosk generating station, completed at a cost of over $8 billion, brought temporary employment, but also controversy, flooded indigenous lands, disrupted ecosystems, displaced communities. The environmental costs of northern hydro development are documented in government reports, and communities downstream bear the consequences. Altered water flows, mercury contamination in fish, loss of traditional food sources, the paradox of cheap houses. Here is what confuses people from Toronto, Vancouver, or any major Canadian city where a detached house costs over $1 million. In rural Manitoba, you can buy a house, a real house, with walls and a roof and bedrooms and a kitchen, for less than the price of a used car. $11,000 in Melita, $8,000 in some of the smaller villages, $15,000 in towns where the main street still has a few operating businesses. Listings sit online for months, sometimes years, with photographs showing rooms that look perfectly habitable, yards that look perfectly normal, kitchens that look like the kitchens in your childhood memories. The prices seem like errors. They are not. The reason nobody buys these houses is that a house is not just a building. A house is a node in a network of services, employment, infrastructure, and human connection. When the network collapses, the house becomes a shell, a structure with walls, but without purpose. Who will buy a house in a town where the school closed 5 years ago? Who wants to own a property where the nearest emergency room is a 90-minute drive on a highway that drifts shut in blizzards? Who can afford to heat a house through 7 months of Manitoba winter when the heating bill exceeds $6,000 a year in propane? Who wants to live where the only internet available is satellite service that drops during storms and costs more per month than fiber optic broadband in Winnipeg? Who moves to a place where the population is aging, the services are shrinking, and the trajectory is obvious to everyone who still lives there? The psychological weight of emptiness is real. In communities where the population has been declining for decades, the people who remain live with a persistent awareness that the world around them is contracting. Every boarded-up storefront, every demolished house, every closed school is a reminder that the place they call home is being subtracted from the map. There is resilience in staying, genuine, stubborn, admirable resilience, but there is also a kind of grief that accumulates in towns where everyone knows that the best days are behind them, and the question is not whether things will get worse, but how quickly. The cost of isolation extends beyond money. Rural Manitoba has some of the highest rates of mental health challenges and substance use disorders in the province. Access to services ranges from limited to non-existent. The RCMP is stretched across vast territories, and response times are measured in hours, not minutes. For elderly residents living alone in small towns where the nearest relative is in Winnipeg, the isolation is not abstract. It is the sound of wind against the windows and the knowledge that nobody is coming. The future of the empty province. Manitoba is not unique in facing rural depopulation. Every prairie province, every northern state, every European country with resource extraction history has regions emptying for the same reasons: mechanization, urbanization, depletion, the gravitational pull of cities. Manitoba is an extreme case because the emptiness is so vast and the climate so unforgiving that the margin for error is thinner than almost anywhere in the developed world. There are initiatives. The Manitoba Provincial Nominee Program has brought tens of thousands of immigrants to the province in recent decades, but the overwhelming majority settle in Winnipeg, not in the declining rural and northern communities that need them most. Some smaller towns have attempted to recruit newcomers with promotional campaigns and welcoming committees, and there have been modest successes. Mennonite communities in southern Manitoba, Filipino communities in towns like Steinbach and Altona, but these are exceptions, concentrated in areas that still have functioning local economies, not in the truly empty regions of the Parkland, the Interlake, or the North. Remote work was supposed to be a savior. Manitoba's cheap housing was theoretically the perfect lure for pandemic-era knowledge workers. But remote work requires reliable broadband, which much of rural Manitoba lacks. It requires comfort with isolation that most urban Canadians cannot sustain beyond a vacation. And it requires services, schools, healthcare, social infrastructure, that the emptiness has already destroyed. The cycle is brutal. Services leave because people leave, and people leave because services leave. The provincial government has invested in infrastructure, but the challenge dwarfs the resources. Over $200 million rehabilitating abandoned mine sites addresses contamination, but does not bring people back. Road maintenance budgets cover thousands of kilometers serving a few hundred residents. Healthcare consolidation, closing rural hospitals to concentrate resources regionally, is fiscally efficient but devastating for communities that lose their last institutional anchor. Climate change compounds everything. The 2025 wildfire season burned over 1.5 million hectares in northern Manitoba, pushing leaf rapids closer to collapse and demonstrating how vulnerable remote communities are. Churchill's permafrost is melting beneath its buildings. The boreal forest is experiencing shifts in fire frequency and species distribution that scientists are still working to understand. And yet people stay. In every declining town, in every shrinking community, there are people who refuse to leave. Some cannot afford to go, trapped by property values too low to fund a move, by ties to land or family that cannot be severed, by a stubborn attachment to a way of life that the wider world has decided is no longer viable. Others stay by choice, because they love the landscape, the silence, the aurora borealis stretching across the entire winter sky, the community bonds that form when everyone who remains knows everyone else. There is a beauty in these places that photographs cannot capture. The specific quality of light that falls across a prairie at 7 in the morning in February, the way a grain elevator casts its shadow across a snow-covered road, the sound of geese returning in April to sloughs that have been frozen since October. Manitoba is the province Canada forgot. It sits between the drama of the Rocky Mountains to the west and the cultural magnetism of Ontario and Quebec to the east, and it occupies a space in the national imagination that is close to blank. When Canadians think of Manitoba, they think of Winnipeg, maybe the jets, maybe the cold. They do not think of Leaf Rapids, where 200 people are clinging to a town that the province is quietly encouraging them to abandon. They do not think of Lynn Lake, where firefighters use abandoned houses for training exercises, because there are more empty buildings than inhabited ones. They do not think of the First Nations communities in the Boreal Shield east of Lake Winnipeg, where people have lived for millennia and still cannot drink the water from their taps. They do not think of the farmhouses in the southwest corner, listed at prices that would not cover a single month's rent in Vancouver, waiting for buyers who will never arrive. You can buy a house in Manitoba for less than a used Honda Civic. The house is real. The rooms are real. The yard is real, but the community that gave the house meaning has been leaving for decades, and what remains is a structure standing in the wind, surrounded by sky and silence, and the vast, indifferent prairie, waiting for someone who is never coming. This is not just the story of one province. It is the story of what happens when economies are built around extraction, when people are brought to a place to take something from the land, and when the thing that was taken is gone, the people leave and the land remains, patient and enormous, reclaiming every road and every building and every dream that was built upon it, one winter at a time.